Every morning at exactly 7:30, she walked through the front doors of the wellness center with the same quiet confidence that had become her signature over the past 15 years. Her colleagues knew her as the woman who could work miracles with broken bodies, the therapist who never gave up on a patient, no matter how hopeless their case seemed. But what they didn't know was how carefully she had built every aspect of her life around staying invisible. She wore cardigans in summer heat, long sleeves when everyone else was reaching for tank tops. When the office Christmas party came around each year, she would make an appearance, stay for exactly 1 hour, exchange pleasant conversation, and then quietly slip away before anyone could ask to. Many personal questions dot the small coastal town had embraced her as one of their own, but she had never quite embraced them back, not fully. There was always this invisible wall, this careful distance she maintained between herself and everyone else. Her treatment room was her sanctuary. Here, she could focus entirely on helping others heal while keeping her own secrets safely locked away. Patients trusted her completely. She had gentle hands and a way of understanding pain that seemed to go deeper than textbook knowledge. When someone came to her after months of unsuccessful treatments elsewhere, she somehow always found the key to their recovery. What people noticed but never questioned was how she always wore gloves during treatments, professional latex gloves that she claimed were simply part of her hygienic practice. No one thought it strange. Medical professionals wear gloves all the time. Her apartment was just as carefully controlled as her work environment. Heavy curtains, comfortable furniture positioned just so, everything designed for privacy and peace. She had lived alone for so long that the silence had become her closest companion. No roommates, no romantic relationships, no close friendships. That might require the kind of vulnerability she had spent decades avoiding. When new staff members joined the wellness center, they would inevitably try to include her in their social circles, lunch invitations, after-work drinks, weekend hiking trips. She had perfected the art of declining gracefully without seeming rude or antisocial. She was always friendly, always professional, but never available for anything that might lead to real connection. The town respected her boundaries because she had earned their respect through her work. She had helped the high school football star walk again after a devastating car accident. She had guided elderly residents through recovery from hip replacements and strokes. She had worked with children who had been injured in playground accidents, always with infinite patience and remarkable results. But for all the healing she facilitated in others, there was something about her that seemed untouchable, unreachable. Dr. Johnson, the wellness center director, had tried many times over the years to promote her to a supervisory position. The offer came with increased responsibility, higher pay, and the requirement to train new therapists. Each time, she politely declined. Managing other people would mean more interaction, more scrutiny, more chances for someone to see past the careful facade she had constructed. She preferred her current role where she could work one-on-one with patients, help them heal, and then watch them walk back into their lives while she remained safely in the background. Her daily routine was precise and comforting in its predictability. Morning coffee at 6, review patient files at 7, first. Appointment at 8, lunch alone in her treatment room while reading professional journals. Afternoon sessions until 6. Then home to her quiet apartment where she would prepare tomorrow's treatment plans and fall asleep to the sound of ocean waves through her window. Weekends were for grocery shopping early in the morning when the stores were nearly empty, long walks on isolated sections of the beach, and catching up on continuing education courses online. She maintained her professional certifications meticulously, always staying current with the latest techniques and research. Learning new ways to help others heal had become her own form of therapy. The irony wasn't lost on her that someone who spent every day helping others overcome physical limitations had never addressed her own. She had learned to live with constant discomfort, had developed countless small adaptations to manage daily activities, had become an expert at hiding the fact that simple movements sometimes caused her significant distress. When new medical research emerged about breakthrough treatments for various conditions, she would read every study, memorize every detail, and apply the knowledge to help her patients. But she never considered that any of these advances might benefit her personally. Her colleagues sometimes wondered about her past, but the speculation was always gentle, respectful. Maybe she had been hurt in a previous relationship. Maybe she had lost someone important. Maybe she was just naturally private. The small town had plenty of residents with complicated histories, and everyone understood the value of letting people keep their secrets, if that's what they needed to do. What none of them realized was that her expertise in treating trauma-related injuries didn't come solely from textbooks and training courses. She understood pain because she had been living with it for 30 years. She could guide patients through the psychological challenges of recovery because she had developed her own sophisticated methods of mental survival. But understanding pain and healing it were two different things entirely. She had become so skilled at functioning despite her limitations that most days she could almost forget they existed. Almost. There were always reminders, the careful way she had to position herself for certain treatments, the specific stretches she did every morning and evening, the particular way she had to sleep to avoid waking up in agony. Still, she had built a good life within the boundaries she had set for herself. She was respected, needed, and financially secure. She had purpose and meaning in her work. She had found ways to contribute to her community without risking the exposure that terrified her more than any physical discomfort ever could. It had taken her 15 years to create this perfectly controlled existence, and she had no intention of changing. It died until the day everything shifted in ways she never could have predicted. 6 months had passed since the new specialist joined their wellness center team. At first, she had been skeptical about working with someone new. Change always made her uncomfortable, and she had grown used to the predictable routine she shared with her long-term colleagues. But this person was different, professional, respectful, and somehow able to understand things without needing long explanations. They worked well together on challenging cases, and gradually, she found herself looking forward to their brief consultations about shared patients. The breakthrough came with Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who had been struggling with recovery after a serious fall. Traditional approaches weren't working, and the poor woman was becoming increasingly discouraged. She suggested they try a combined treatment approach, something that would require close coordination between their different specialties. Working together on Mrs. Chen's case, she noticed something unexpected. The new specialist had an intuitive understanding of complex trauma recovery that went beyond typical training. They seemed to grasp the psychological aspects of physical healing in ways that most medical professionals missed entirely. More importantly, they never pushed for information she wasn't ready to share. When she would redirect conversations away from personal topics, they simply accepted it and moved on. No probing questions, no uncomfortable silences, no obvious curiosity about her private life. This respectful approach gradually created something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of professional trust that felt almost like friendship. The turning point came on a particularly difficult Tuesday in late autumn. Mrs. Chen had just achieved a major milestone in her recovery, taking her first unassisted steps in months. The celebration in the treatment room was joyful, with tears of happiness from the patient and her family. After everyone left, she found herself lingering in the break room with her colleague, both of them still energized by the success they had witnessed. "You know," the specialist said quietly, "what we accomplished with Mrs. Chen today. That kind of breakthrough doesn't happen by accident. You have insights into trauma recovery that most people in our field never develop." She felt her usual defenses rising, ready to deflect the compliment with something about professional training and experience. But something in her colleague's tone stopped her. "I mean it," they continued. "The way you understood exactly what she needed, the specific techniques you suggested, the patience you showed when standard approaches failed, that comes from somewhere deeper than textbooks." For a moment, she considered giving her standard response about years of practice and continuing education. But sitting there in the quiet break room, with the satisfaction of Mrs. Chen's success still warm between them, she found herself saying something completely unexpected. I suppose we all have our reasons for choosing this work. It was the closest she had ever come to acknowledging that her professional expertise might have personal roots. Her colleague nodded slowly, seeming to understand the weight of even that small admission. 3 weeks later, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She was experiencing one of her particularly difficult periods. The weather had turned cold and damp, which always made things worse for her. She had been managing the increased discomfort with her usual methods, but it was becoming harder to maintain her professional demeanor during patient sessions. Standing in front of her bathroom mirror that morning, she realized she had two choices. She could continue pushing through until the flare-up subsided naturally, which might take weeks. Or she could do something she had never considered before. She could ask for help. The thought terrified her more than any physical pain ever could. But watching Mrs. Chen's courage during her recovery had planted a seed of possibility. If a 70-year-old woman could face her fears and trust others to help her heal, maybe it was time to examine her own stubborn independence. That afternoon, she knocked on her colleague's office door. "Do you have a few minutes?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Of course, come in." She closed the door behind her and took a seat across from the desk, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that this is not easy for me." Her colleague leaned forward slightly, their expression attentive but not intrusive. "I have a medical situation," she began, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "Something I've been managing on my own for a very long time. But lately, I've been thinking that maybe I don't have to keep handling it alone." She paused, surprised by how much effort it took to continue. "I've watched you work with our most difficult cases, and I've seen how you approach complex trauma situations. You understand things that most people in our field don't, and more than that, you respect boundaries while still providing excellent care." Her colleague waited patiently, not rushing to fill the silence. "What I'm asking is whether you would consider providing treatment for someone who has been avoiding medical care for personal reasons. Someone who has very specific needs regarding privacy and trust, of course." Came the immediate response. "Professional discretion is fundamental to what we do." She took a deep breath, realizing she was about to cross a line she had drawn 30 years ago. "The patient would be me." The words hung in the air between them, carrying decades of carefully guarded independence. Her colleague's expression remained calm and professional, but she could see the understanding dawning in their eyes. "Can you tell me what kind of assistance you're looking for?" And for the first time in 30 years, she began to explain that she needed help with something she had been carrying alone for far too long. The conversation that followed was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Medical questions were asked and answered with clinical precision, but underneath the professional exchange was an undercurrent of human compassion that made her chest tight with unfamiliar emotion. By the time they finished talking, arrangements had been made for her first treatment session, private, discreet, and completely under her control. Walking to her car that evening, she felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, the possibility that someone else might be able to help carry a burden she had been shouldering alone. It was terrifying and hopeful in equal measure. The evening she had chosen for her first treatment session felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff she had been avoiding for 30 years. She had insisted on meeting at her apartment, in her own space, where she could maintain some sense of control over an inherently vulnerable situation. She spent the entire day preparing, not just practically but emotionally. The apartment was cleaned until it sparkled, not because it needed to be, but because focusing on details helped calm her racing thoughts. She had arranged her living room to accommodate the treatment, moving furniture and setting up the portable table she occasionally used for her own exercises. When the doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, her heart hammered against her ribs with such force she was certain it could be heard from the hallway. "Thank you for coming," she said, opening the door with hands that trembled only slightly. Her colleague entered carrying a professional treatment bag, their demeanor calm and reassuring. They had discussed the general parameters during their office conversation, But she knew that the reality of seeing her situation would be different from any theoretical understanding. "How are you feeling about this?" they asked, setting down their equipment, terrified. She answered honestly, but also ready, "I think." They spent the first 20 minutes simply talking, not about medical details, but about the process itself. Her colleague explained each step they would take, asked about her comfort levels, and established clear signals for stopping or pausing if she needed breaks. "Remember," they said gently, "you're in complete control here. We go at your pace, and we stop whenever you need to stop." She nodded, appreciating the emphasis on her autonomy even as she prepared to surrender some of the control she had maintained for decades. "I need to tell you the story first," she said finally, "before we begin. You need to understand what you're going to see." She settled into her favorite chair, the one position where she could see both the front door and the windows, and began to speak about things she had never told another living person. "I was 7 years old when it happened. There was a fire in our house, an electrical problem that started in the walls. My little brother and I were asleep when the smoke detectors went off." Her voice remained steady, though her hands twisted. "Together in her lap, my parents got to him first. They handed him to me and told me to take him outside while they went back for our cat. I was supposed to get him to safety and then wait for them." She paused, the weight of 3 decades settling around the words. "But he was scared, and he was crying, and he broke away from me. He ran back toward the house. I went after him." The room was completely quiet except for the sound of waves through her windows. "A beam came down. It caught me across my back and arms, and the flames." She stopped, swallowing hard. "I don't remember much after that until I woke up in the hospital weeks later." Her colleague listened without interruption, their expression compassionate but professional. "My brother didn't make it out. My parents tried to find us both, but the smoke was too thick, and they were overcome before they could reach us. I was the only one who survived." She looked out the window toward the ocean, watching the last light fade from the horizon. "The physical healing took months, skin grafts, infections, months of rehabilitation. But the emotional healing," she shrugged, "I'm not sure that ever really happened. I became convinced that if people saw what the fire had done to me, they would only see the tragedy. They would look at me and think about death and loss and failure. I decided it was better to keep it hidden." She turned back to face her colleague, her decision firm despite her nervousness. "But 30 years is a long time to carry something alone. And watching our patients find courage to face their own challenges has made me realize that maybe I don't have to keep hiding." They moved to the treatment area she had prepared, and she began the process she had never imagined she would undertake. First, the cardigan she wore even in summer heat, then the long-sleeved shirt underneath, with each layer removed. Decades of careful concealment fell away. The scarring covered nearly half of her torso and extended down both arms. The tissue was tight and discolored, with areas where the skin had never properly healed. Some regions showed the clear patterns of skin grafts, while others bore the permanent marks of severe burns. Her colleague's professional demeanor never wavered, but she could see the understanding dawn in their eyes. This wasn't just about physical discomfort from old injuries. This was about someone who had been carrying the weight of survivor's guilt and trauma-related shame for 3 decades. "The tightness in my shoulders and back has gotten worse over the years," she explained, her voice clinical despite the personal nature of the conversation. "I've developed compensation patterns that are creating secondary problems. The scar tissue limits my range of motion, and I've been managing chronic pain with techniques I learned during my original rehabilitation." They began with simple assessment, gentle examination to understand the extent of the limitations and areas of particular concern. Their touch was professional and respectful, but she still found herself fighting the urge to cover up and retreat. "This must have been incredibly difficult to live with," they said quietly. "The physical part, yes, but the emotional part has been harder. Carrying the guilt about my brother, feeling responsible for not being able to save him, believing that people would see me as damaged if they knew the truth." As the examination continued, she found herself sharing details she had never spoken aloud. how she had chosen her profession partly as penance, trying to help others heal from trauma she couldn't prevent, how she had structured her entire life around hiding her scars because she was afraid people would treat her differently if they knew. I became an expert at helping other people overcome exactly the kind of trauma I never dealt with myself, she said with a bitter laugh. I could guide patients through the psychological challenges of disfiguring injuries while never addressing my own. Her colleague worked with gentle precision, assessing mobility restrictions and identifying areas where intervention might provide relief. But more than the physical examination, she felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: the profound relief of being fully seen and accepted. You know, her colleague said as they concluded the initial assessment, what you've accomplished despite these limitations is remarkable. Most people with this extent of scarring would have significant functional restrictions, but you've found ways to adapt that have allowed you to maintain a demanding physical profession. For the first time in 30 years, someone was looking at her scars and seeing strength rather than damage. I think we can help with the pain and mobility issues, they continued. But more than that, I think this process might help you realize that the strength you've shown in building your life and career is something to be proud of, not something to hide. As she slowly put her shirt back on, she felt something shifting inside her chest. The terror was still there, but underneath, it was something else: hope. For the first time since she was 7 years old, she wasn't carrying her burden completely alone. The weeks that followed that first evening changed everything, though the transformation happened so gradually she almost didn't notice it at first. They established a routine that felt safe and manageable. Every Tuesday and Friday evening, her colleague would arrive at her apartment with their treatment equipment. The sessions began with careful assessment of how she was feeling that day, both physically and emotionally, because they had quickly learned that the two were completely connected. The scar tissue had created a complex web of restrictions throughout her upper body. 30 years of compensation had led her to develop movement patterns that protected the most damaged areas while overworking other muscles and joints. Her left shoulder sat higher than her right, her spine curved slightly to accommodate the tightness across her back. She had unconsciously learned to use her arms in ways that minimized stretching of the scarred tissue. It's like your body built a whole new blueprint for movement, her colleague explained during one of their early sessions. Your nervous system learned to work around the damaged areas. But over time, those workarounds created their own problems. The treatment approach they developed together was unlike anything she had experienced during her original rehabilitation. Back then, the focus had been on basic function and healing. This was about optimization, about helping her body remember capabilities it had forgotten or never fully developed. Some evenings, the work was purely physical. Gentle stretching to improve flexibility in the scar tissue, strengthening exercises for muscles that had been underused for decades, manual therapy to address the chronic tension patterns she had developed. Other sessions were more emotionally challenging. As her body began to relax and open up, memories and feelings she had buried for 30 years started to surface. There were evenings when she would find herself crying without understanding why. Tears coming from some deep place she had sealed off long ago. This is normal, her colleague assured her during one particularly difficult session. When we've been holding trauma in our bodies for a long time, releasing the physical tension often brings up emotional material too. The breakthrough moments came in waves, each one surprising her with its intensity. The first major shift happened about 6 weeks into their work together. She had been lying face down on the treatment table while her colleague worked on the scarred tissue across her back. The touch was gentle but firm, encouraging the tight areas to soften and release. Suddenly, she could breathe more deeply than she had in years. The sensation was so unexpected that she gasped, her ribcage expanding in a way that felt completely foreign. What just happened? She asked, her voice muffled by the face rest. I think some of the restriction around your ribs just released. Try taking another deep breath. She did, and felt air filling spaces in her lungs that had been compressed for decades. It was like discovering she had been living in a house with rooms she never knew existed. That night, She slept better than she had since childhood. The improvements weren't always linear. Some weeks brought significant progress, while others felt like setbacks. There were days when the old pain patterns would return with a vengeance, reminding her why she had learned to be so careful with her movements. But gradually, consistently, things began to change. She found herself reaching for items on high shelves without the automatic wince she had carried for 30 years. She could turn her head to check blind spots while driving without the sharp pull across her neck and shoulders. Simple tasks like washing her hair or putting on a sweater became easier and less painful. More surprisingly, the emotional changes were keeping pace with the physical ones. During one session, as her colleague worked on a particularly stubborn area of scar tissue, she found herself talking about her brother for the first time since that initial evening. "I used to wonder what kind of person he would have become," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "He was only 5, but he was already so curious about everything. He wanted to be a firefighter when he grew up." Her colleague continued their work, providing the kind of presence that made it safe to speak difficult truths. "I think I've been afraid that if I got better, if I let myself heal and be happy, it would somehow dishonor his memory. Like I didn't deserve to have a good life when his was cut short." "What do you think he would want for you?" came the gentle question. She considered this, feeling the tissue under her colleague's hands beginning to soften and release. "He would want me to be happy. He would probably be annoyed that I've spent 30 years hiding from the world." As the months progressed, she began to notice changes that went beyond pain reduction and improved mobility. She started participating more in conversations at work. She accepted an invitation to lunch with colleagues for the first time in years. She even considered Dr. Johnson's repeated offers of promotion with something other than automatic refusal. The relationship with her colleague had evolved too. What had begun as a purely professional arrangement had deepened into something that felt like genuine friendship, though they maintained careful boundaries around their therapeutic work, She said one evening as they finished a particularly successful session, "I never imagined that asking for help could feel like this." "What does it feel like?" She thought for a moment, surprising herself with the answer that came. "Like coming home to myself." The most significant breakthrough came during their 4th month of working together. Her colleague was addressing some persistent tension in her shoulder when suddenly, without warning, she felt something deep inside her chest crack open. It wasn't physical, though the sensation was as real as any muscle releasing. It was as if some internal wall she had built around her heart had finally crumbled. She began to cry, but these weren't the tears of pain or frustration she had shed before. These were tears of relief, of release, of finally letting go of something she had been carrying for far too long. "I think," she said through her tears, "I think I'm ready to stop hiding." Her colleague smiled, continuing their gentle work as she wept. "I think you've been ready for a while now. You just needed to remember that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry your experiences in a way that adds to your strength, rather than limiting it." By the time winter turned to spring, she realized that the person who had first knocked on her colleague's office door asking for help was almost unrecognizable from who she had become. She still had scars. She always would. But for the first time in 30 years, she was beginning to see them as marks of survival rather than shame. And that changed everything. 1 year later, she stood at the edge of the town square, watching volunteers set up booths for the annual health and wellness fair. For 15 years, she had participated as a professional, running a booth about physical therapy while maintaining her careful distance from anything too personal or revealing. This year was different. This year, she wore a short-sleeved blouse. The morning air was warm, but not uncomfortably so, and she felt the unfamiliar sensation of sunlight on her arms for the first time in 3 decades. People passed by, some offering friendly greetings, others stopping to chat about the upcoming event. Not one person stared or asked uncomfortable questions about the visible scarring on her arms. It had taken her months to work up to this moment. The decision hadn't come easily or suddenly. It had grown gradually, like a seed that had been planted during those healing sessions and finally sprouted into courage. The turning point had come 6 weeks earlier. During a conversation with Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman had returned for a follow-up appointment, walking confidently and moving with ease that seemed miraculous compared to her condition a year before. "You saved my life," Mrs. Chen had said, taking her hands in a gesture of gratitude. "Not just my ability to walk, but my belief that healing was possible at my age." Looking down at their joined hands, she realized that Mrs. Chen was seeing her scars clearly for the first time. The older woman's eyes moved from the visible marks to her face, with an expression of understanding and respect. "We all carry our battles," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Some are just more visible than others. Thank you for showing me that visible scars can be signs of strength." That conversation had planted something that grew into today's decision to step into the world. Without her protective layers, her booth at the health fair looked similar to previous years, with informational brochures about physical therapy and recovery techniques. But this year, she had added something new, a small display about trauma recovery and the connection between physical and emotional healing. The first few people who stopped by her booth responded exactly as she had hoped they would. They were interested in the information, asked thoughtful questions about recovery techniques, and treated her with the same professional respect she had always received. It was almost anticlimactic, which was exactly perfect. Around mid-morning, a woman approached her booth hesitantly. She was young, probably in her late 20s, and kept her hands tucked deep in the pockets of an oversized hoodie despite the warm weather. "Excuse me," the woman said quietly. "I was reading your brochure about trauma recovery. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." The woman glanced round to make sure no one else was listening, then pulled one hand partway out of her pocket. Even in the brief glimpse, the scarring was visible. "Car accident 2 years ago," she explained quickly, shoving her hand back into hiding. "I was wondering, how do you know when you're ready to stop hiding?" She felt her heart squeeze with recognition and compassion. This young woman was standing exactly where she had been just 1 year ago. "I think," she said gently, "you're ready when staying hidden becomes more painful than the fear of being seen." They talked for nearly an hour, about the accident that had changed the young woman's life, about the isolation that came with feeling damaged, about the exhausting effort required to keep painful secrets. "I became a physical therapist partly because I understood what it felt like to live in a body that had been through trauma," she shared. "But it took me 30 years to realize that helping others heal while refusing to heal myself wasn't actually helping anyone." By the end of their conversation, the young woman had pulled both hands out of her pockets and was examining the informational materials with genuine interest. "Would you consider coming to see me professionally?" she asked. "Not just for physical therapy, but for support in working through the emotional aspects of recovery?" The young woman nodded, tears in her eyes. "I think I'd like that." As the day progressed, she was surprised by how many people approached her with similar stories. A teenager who had been burned in a house fire, an elderly man dealing with surgical scars from cancer treatment, a middle-aged woman whose childhood accident had left her feeling self-conscious for decades. Each conversation reinforced something she was just beginning to understand. Her decision to stop hiding wasn't just about her own healing. It was creating space for others to consider their own possibilities for openness and recovery. Dr. Johnson stopped by her booth in the afternoon, his usual professional demeanor mixed with something that looked like pride. "You know," he said, "I've been watching the response to your booth today. People are connecting with you in ways I've never seen before." She nodded, feeling the truth of his observation. "I've been thinking about that promotion offer you've made over the years," she said. "The one about training new therapists and developing trauma-informed treatment protocols." His eyebrows rose slightly. "And I think I might be ready to take on more responsibility. I think I have some insights now that could be valuable in training others." They talked about possibilities, developing specialized programs for trauma survivors, creating support groups for people dealing with visible differences, establishing protocols that address both physical and emotional aspects of recovery. For the first time in her career, she found herself excited about professional growth and increased visibility rather than terrified. By dot, as the health fair wound down in the late afternoon, her colleagues stopped by to help her pack up her materials. They had maintained their therapeutic relationship throughout her transformation, adjusting their work as her needs changed and evolved. "How does it feel?" they asked, watching her fold up the banner that had drawn so many meaningful conversations. "Throughout the day, scary," she said honestly, "but good scary, like standing at the edge of something new and realizing I'm not afraid to jump." That evening, she walked along the beach as she had done countless times over the past 15 years. But tonight, she wore a sleeveless sundress, feeling the ocean breeze on skin that had been hidden from the world for 3 decades. She thought about the young woman from the health fair, about Mrs. Chen's words of gratitude, about all the people she had helped over the years while carrying her own pain in secret. For the first time, she understood that her scars weren't just marks of what she had survived. They were proof of what was possible. They were evidence that someone could endure unimaginable loss and pain and still build a life of meaning and purpose. They were, she realized, beautiful in their own way. As the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, she made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 1 year earlier. She was going to start a support group for trauma survivors. She was going to write about her experiences and share them with others who might need to know that healing was possible. She was going to accept Dr. Johnson's promotion and use her position to help create treatment approaches that honored both the body and the spirit. She was going to live her life fully visible, scars and all. Walking back toward town, she passed other evening walkers who offered friendly waves and casual greetings. Some noticed her scars, and some didn't, but for the first time in 30 years, it didn't matter. She was no longer hiding from the world. The world was finally getting to meet all of her, and she was discovering that she had been worth knowing all along.